without further ado, I'd like to call on to stage somebody who's going to give us some stats and facts. I love this accounting situation that's happening right in the beginning. Please, a round of applause for Lullu Krugel.
Good morning, everybody. Sure. Nangula, how lovely to see you. Nangula and I are former colleagues. And I have to say, this is my 6th time to Namibia, so I'm very brave, I hope. And I hope I will be here a couple more times. So, I'm Lullu Krugel. I'm the Chief Economist for PwC Africa, and I'm also the Sustainability Leader for PwC. So you might see some sustainability things creep out as I go through what I want to say to you this morning. You will forgive me, I have a very bright pink note card with me because there's an acronym that I'm pretty sure I will forget, so I'm keeping that with me. I will chat to you a little bit about what's happening in the world of geopolitics and economics this morning. Hopefully I won't bore you to death. I actually started out studying law, and in my third year, when I was finishing up that degree, I went home one weekend from varsity and I told my parents that I actually really like this economics subject. So I think I'm going to continue with that. Now, my dad is not a very outgoing person, and he just sat there and looked at me and he said, well, at least if you don't have a job, you'll know why. So that's one of the benefits of being an economist. So what I want to start with is just looking at some of the emerging risks that we're currently seeing in the world and the picture that it's painting for us about what do we think about the world that we live in. Now, every year at Davos, the World Economic Forum releases their Global Risk Report. And that's a report, in my opinion, where they have the best view of what people are thinking about some of the key emerging risks in the short term and then also in the longer term. So what you see on the slide in front of you there on the left-hand side is the shorter term risks, and on the right-hand side, the longer term risks. And what we've done is just to show how these move up and down and new ones that come in, etc. You will see those connecting lines. So that's what the connecting lines in the middle means. Now, as I said, I love looking at this, but just FYI, in 2020, nobody predicted a pandemic. So we're not too great with predictions. Nonetheless, it tells you a lot about what people are thinking. And when I saw this year's risk report, one of the things that hit me was that the WEF said they're dropping climate change as a risk from the report. And I said to myself, how on earth could they do that? How could they drop climate change? And when I started reading the report, I realized the view was that climate change is not a risk anymore. It is a reality. We're living that. We cannot see that as a risk anymore. But what we do not necessarily understand and what we do need to think about is how climate change will impact us going forward. So therefore, the black numbers that you see there, or the black items, extreme weather events over the short term, and then over the long term, extreme weather events, critical change to climate systems, biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse, and then natural resource shortages, and then at the bottom, pollution, of course. Those are all the things and ways in which we could see climate change potentially playing out, and we view those as some of our key risks. And what is, as I said, what is always interesting for me is to see what new risks emerge in about 10 years' time, and which ones do we think will still be around. And for me, that says something about our own belief and ability in changing what is happening at the moment and what is going to happen going forward. And what worries me is that we don't seem to have that much belief in certain things, and I suppose in certain areas we believe that we're probably too far along already to really change where we are. So this brings me to the African continent a little bit, and this year's and next year's economic growth forecasts. And the specific forecasts are by the IMF. And, 3.84%, much of a muchness. The thing that is really important is that we want to see true forward momentum and growth that is faster than our population growth. That's the first thing. And secondly, inclusive growth. And I think that is probably one of the biggest changes that I've experienced over the years that I've been an economist is economists finally realizing a penny dropping somewhere to say we and businesses and everything that happens isn't just plonk on this system, we're part of it. So when we think about growth, are we really considering the full price and consequences of what we are doing? And I believe that that is a big shift that's currently happening. We're not very good yet at fully getting a picture of what the true price of that growth is, positive and negative. And I think those are one of the key changes that we're going to see. And then for African governments in this framework, there are a couple of areas that we need to consider. First of all, how do we look at our public finances? If you followed what's been happening in Africa, you would have seen that there's been quite a lot of pressure on our public finances, as has been the case in a lot of places in the world. And how do we actually grow the economy while stabilizing public finances? That's going to be an interesting and is an interesting conundrum at the moment. And then if we look at the rest of the world and the things that are currently happening, there's also, we are not separate of this world, we are part of it, and a lot of these things could escalate further, could impact us, and is impacting us in ways already. So we need to take that into account. This particular view is from the Economist Intelligence Unit, and some of these risks that they have highlighted does not actually seem that far-fetched. Others do seem a little bit more out there. But the bottom line is that, in this whole environment in which we are living, these things happen and they impact all of us in some or other way on the African continent as well. So if we unpack that growth in Africa a little bit further, the interesting thing for me is if you look at that grey block, second from the bottom there, is the contribution of the services industry, and of which the hospitality industry is a key part. Now, just before COVID, myself and my team did some research that was really, really interesting, where we looked at what industries would actually, if you look at investment, cents per dollar, or, the return on investment doesn't matter. We looked at a whole bunch of different ways in which you can measure that. Not only the return on investment from financial terms, but in terms of job creation, in terms of creating employment opportunities, etc. Which ones would be most beneficial for African economies? And in most cases, for a lot of the countries that we looked at in sub-Saharan Africa, tourism was in one of the top three. So a key factor that we felt that could really change the growth direction of the continent. I'm going to skip over this. It's a bit boring, just a bunch of figures to look at what we do believe will happen to the interest rate. But I personally believe that if we see lower interest rates over the short to medium term, it will be an important injection to African economies and to the global economy, in fact. We are very dependent on the health of our consumers in quite a few countries in Africa. So, seeing that lower interest rates might really mean a lot for us. Okay. And then on the, I suppose it depends how you look at it. If you look at it from a tourism sector, this is good news. If you look at it as somebody that needs to pay something, it's a different story. As a destination, Africa is actually quite cheap if you look at the rest of the world, and offers good value for money. I actually don't want to say cheap. It offers incredible value for money if you look at tourists coming from other parts of the world. So yes, we've had and received a bit of a hammering with a couple of our exchange rates. And yeah, depending on which side of the coin you are on, it it could impact you negatively, but I think in this particular industry, it's actually quite a positive factor. Okay. So the tourism industry, as Nangula has said, has received quite a bit of investment over the last couple of years in Africa. And if you look at the map there, it's some information from Tourism News, Statista, FMI Blog, a whole bunch of places, looking at high levels of current investment in tourism and high potential for future investment. And Namibia, it might be just because they didn't research it, but there's more to do, I suppose, if we look at our host country. But as a continent, we've seen some key trends actually that has impacted the industry. First of all, the recovery from the pandemic. So international arrivals have surged, and we'll look at that specifically for Africa now. But we're not yet where we used to be before COVID hit. And I'm asking myself why. Why do people prefer to go to other parts of the world more than Africa and more than they used to? And that's a trend that we need to change. So then we have a stat there about South Africa, a couple of stats there. We spoke about the impact of events, and there's just an example from South Africa looking at the impact of sports tourism. We've seen digital nomads becoming more and more prevalent, so people living and working in two different places. It's apparently causing some of my tax colleagues a bit of a headache, because there's a whole bunch of things that we need to keep into account. Conservation-based tourism is growing massively, and then digitization, new technology. Now on that, I want to actually show you something, the very last slide that I have there, that is quite interesting. So if we look at sub-Saharan Africa's tourism numbers, when COVID hit, and what has happened subsequently is we do see that the industry, or the receipts for the industry, has taken a bit of hiding, and it hasn't fully recovered yet to where it was before COVID. And there's a bunch of reasons. It could be people's spending ability. It could be travel trends. It could be a whole bunch of reasons, but the question that we need to ask ourselves is, how do we get that spending levels up to where it was in 2009 and the period before COVID? There are a couple of things, as I mentioned, that has a massive impact on what we're seeing, climate change being one of them, biodiversity loss, insufficient knowledge and marketing issues, crime and safety concerns, which I often found is not, I won't say not true or not an issue at all, but very misrepresented very often by people. Living in Africa and actually traveling here, I realized that very often the people don't have the full knowledge. And then some infrastructure limitations that we also need to deal with. So all of those kinds of things we need to take into account when we consider how do we grow the industry. Now this, and I do apologize that this is a slide from South Africa, but it's something that I want to show you actually and explain to you the reason or how we should be thinking about our economies and the competitiveness of economies. Now, you might all know that very often if we talk about whether economy is productive or not productive, the levels of productivity, etc., we often look at output or GDP or production per capita. And that's always a backward-looking measure. We take the overall production and we divide it by the number of people in the labor force, and that way we get to a number. Now, my colleagues in the Middle East has done some very interesting work for the first time this year, and I've asked them, please, please, please expand it to include quite a few other African countries, and let's see what we can do going forward to include more countries. So they took 20 countries globally, and they said, well, what if we turn it on its head? What if rather than looking at productivity backward-looking, we look at it forward-looking? So what are the factors that impact productivity? And it's made up of up to 100. So this is the productivity pie, and then split up into pieces up to 100. Now, it's very interesting if you look at that. What it means is, for all these areas that you see there, and by the way, just to explain, because a lot of people often ask about suicide, and I'll explain internet usage now. So suicide is a measure that they took for mental wellness or mental health. And I say to them, I think it's a bit, narrowly focused, but that's the one where they could get data for countries to compare. So that's why they included that. And then internet usage, you would see, is a negative. Very interesting. So what it says in South Africa, as we expand internet usage, it's negatively impacting on our productivity. So I'm thinking that it's probably because we're playing games, I don't know, but we're not using it as productive as we could. So be that as it may, for me, what this could tell us, because at the end of the day, productivity is what determines your competitiveness as a destination, or as an investment destination, tourism destination, etc. If we understand this, and we understand better what the drivers are for productivity, and by the way, this was done with AI, so I'm pretty sure somebody that understands AI would be able to easily replicate this for other countries. But anyway, it gives you a sense of what are those levers that you need to pull to actually change the competitive landscape of a country. And key attributes are, of course, for all countries, is what does our labor force look like? What does our physical capital look like? Social capital, natural capital, innovation and intangible capital, and institutions. And at the end of the day, some or other mix of those will determine what happens with our productivity. I'm going to stop there, and I'm not even getting to my pink card. I've skipped right past it. It's been lovely to chat to you this morning. Hopefully this would give you some things to think about, and very happy to chat to you when we have a bit of a tea break. Thank you so much.